Tonight,
he's not responsive right now.
the closing arguments, the fate of Derek Chauvin in the murder trial over the death of George Floyd, now in the hands of the jury.
You are the sole judges.
This is cities prepare for protests ahead of the verdict.
And the president's push for that $2 trillion infrastructure bill.
I've noticed everybody's for infrastructure. The question is, who's going to pay for it?
Meeting with lawmakers on both sides of the aisle at the White House.
Plus, Democrats want the nation's capital to be a state, and a bill to change the Constitution for the 51st state is heading to the House floor.
And into thin air, the NASA helicopter's historic first flight on the Red Planet. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
The jury prepares to make a decision in what is being called the trial of the 21st century. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jenna Browder.
Good evening. I'm John Jessup. Tonight, one step closer to the final outcome after both sides in the Derek Chauvin murder trial give their closing arguments over the trial or the killing of George Floyd.
And now the fate of the former Minneapolis police officer videotaped with his knee on Floyd's neck rests in the hands of these 12 jurors. CBN's George Thomas was following the trial all day, and he joins us now with tonight's top story. George?
Well, 48 witnesses, dozens of video and still images, and hours of testimony. Now, it is up to the members of the jury to decide the fate of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin, who stands accused of murdering George Floyd. As they did over 11 days of the trial, the prosecution used multiple video clips and images one last time today to make their closing argument that Derek Chauvin had to have known that he was squeezing the life out of George Floyd.
Sometimes you ask for the truth, sometimes you insist on the truth. And the truth is the defendant was on top of him for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. And he had to know.
The prosecution telling the diverse jury that the former Minneapolis police officer resorted to excessive and unreasonable force when he put his knee on Floyd's neck and back.
This was not policing. It was unnecessary. It was gratuitous. It was disproportionate. And he did it on purpose.
The defense asserting the opposite, saying Chauvin's actions were reasonable and that other factors like Floyd's drug use and heart issues were the cause of his death.
Standard is not what should the officer have done in these circumstances. The standard is what were the facts that were known to this officer at the precise moment he used force.
Chauvin is facing murder and manslaughter charges over Floyd's death on May 25, 2020. For nearly 3 weeks, jurors listened to 48 witnesses, among them Floyd's family members and numerous medical and law enforcement experts. Now they'll have to decide whether or not the prosecution proved beyond a reasonable doubt that Chauvin is guilty. Meanwhile, tightened security at state capitals across the country ahead of a possible verdict next week. About 3,000 National Guard troops and more than 1,000 police officers are being deployed all over Minnesota. D.C., New York, and Philadelphia will see similar security measures. By the way, the jury will be sequestered until a verdict is reached. Deliberations could take anywhere from several hours to days or even weeks. As the judge told the jurors this morning, just before closing arguments got underway, plan for long, hope for short. John and Jenna?
All right, George Thomas, thank you very much. Meanwhile, a major milestone in the fight against COVID-19. Half of all American adults have now received at least one vaccine shot.
That's right, Jenna. The news comes as the White House and public health officials warn Americans of the need to stay vigilant.
I want to recognize that we remain in a complicated stage. On the one hand, more people in the United States are being vaccinated every single day at an accelerated pace. On the other hand, cases and hospitalizations are increasing in some areas of the country, and cases among younger people who have not yet been vaccinated are also increasing.
As the race between the vaccine and the virus continues, the White House is committing $1.7 billion to invest in the fight against variants of the virus. Well, weeks after unveiling its $2 trillion plan to improve everything from roads to the web and beyond, the Biden White House is beginning to move on infrastructure.
Today, the administration hit the gas on its goal to get more people aboard this updated infrastructure train. CBN News senior Washington correspondent Jennifer Wishon joins us with more. Jennifer?
John and Jenna, the administration is working to achieve a number of goals with its American Jobs Plan. While it greatly expands the idea of infrastructure and seeks to put millions of Americans back to work, it also checks key items on the liberal wish list.
Hello, North Carolina.
Vice President Kamala Harris is working to sell it to the American people, choosing a North Carolina community college as the backdrop for her first major speech on the economy.
I believe that infrastructure is about all the support systems that make our country work. Roads that keep us moving, water that keeps us healthy, broadband that keeps us connected, and care, childcare, home care.
It's an expanded definition that stretches several bridges too far for many Republicans, one that includes a Harris priority from her time in the Senate, a plan to electrify the nation's school buses, a priority supporters say would cut down on diesel pollutants harmful to children. The vice president also championed an ideal many lawmakers see as a job killer.
Now, the best way, I also believe, to get a good job is through a strong union.
For his part, President Biden invited a bipartisan group of lawmakers to the Oval Office to discuss areas of agreement. Speaking on Fox News Sunday, senior senators from both sides previewed what a compromise could look like.
We've all agreed for a long time that we need to invest more in American infrastructure. We just disagree about how to pay for it.
There is a core infrastructure bill that we could pass with appropriate pay-fors like roads and bridges, and even reaching out to broadband, which this pandemic has exposed a great digital divide in the country.
It's not just Republicans. Some Democrats have also hesitated to jump on board with the president. Democrat Senator Joe Manchin, who wields tremendous power, recently said of the plan, if he can't go home to West Virginia and explain it, then he can't vote for it.
And meanwhile, it's unclear exactly how many jobs the Biden-Harris plan would create. However, the vice president says most of them would require about 6 months of additional training after high school. John and Jenna?
All right, Jennifer Wishon, thank you. And here with us now, CBN News Chief Political Analyst David Brody. David, another meeting with bipartisan leaders in the White House. This one with some bigger names than we saw last time. Is the president going to be able to cobble together a coalition on this, David, or will Democrats still end up going it alone?
Well, I think ultimately, Jenna, he's going to end up going it alone. In other words, he and the Democrat Party. I think this is headed toward budget reconciliation, which means 50 votes only. That's all they're going to need eventually for passing this $2.3 trillion bill. And Jennifer talked about, this bipartisanship, that a deal is there to be had. And that's exactly right. Here's the problem. Republicans want an $800 billion deal on just infrastructure, as in roads, bridges, highways. That deal Biden could sign tomorrow. Done deal, unity, and we can all sing Kumbaya. The problem is that Democrats don't want to do that. Biden would take it in a heartbeat, but the progressive wing of the party is pushing him to $2.3 trillion, and then we're getting into welfare infrastructure, social infrastructure for all different sorts of programs, and that's the problem here. That's why unity will not win here. What will win is the progressive 50-plus Democrats will do it through budget reconciliation. They're going for the whole enchilada. They're not looking for unity here.
David, we know the Senate parliamentarian recently did approve of the measure of being the budget reconciliation. Speaking of compromise, or perhaps more accurately, gridlock, Democrats are set to reintroduce the Green New Deal on Tuesday. David, two-part question. Will it pass? And if so, has public opinion shifted enough for it to gain traction?
Yes, it'll pass because it's the House, and Nancy Pelosi is good at counting votes, and she probably, I'm sure, has the votes to pass if she's going to bring up the bill. Number one, by the way, on the bill, I got to tell you, it's 172. What is it, $1 billion? I get my billions and trillions confused when it comes to the Biden administration, but this is about $172 billion or so, which I guess is small potatoes compared to $2.3 trillion. But besides that, in answer to your second question, no. I mean, public opinion here is not going to sway the deal at all. In other words, this is going to survive in the House. It'll die in the Senate, and that'll be the end of that. Once again, I get back to the budget reconciliation issue. Now, they can't do budget reconciliation with this bill. The only way this bill can even pass is Democrats are going to have to change the legislative filibuster, meaning you only need 50 votes to pass any bill that they want, but we're not there yet.
David, I want to ask you about Congresswoman Maxine Waters and the comments she made in Minnesota over the weekend. You know, Republicans are slamming her for saying that racial justice activists need to get more confrontational. That's a quote. David, do you think Congresswoman Waters will face consequences? About 30 seconds left.
No, because Nancy Pelosi is calling the shots in the House. I was speaking to Roland Martin today. He's host of Roland Martin Unfiltered. He's a liberal. He doesn't like to call himself a Democrat, but he's a liberal. And he said, look, what she was saying, just because she said the word confrontational, she didn't say the word violent. And he says that should end it right there. That being confrontational in the streets does not mean being violent in the streets. And that's going to be the way the liberals look at it. And you can insert whatever emoji you want on the conservative side for that.
All right, we are out of time. CBN's David Brody, our chief political analyst. Thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Jenna.
And coming up, the Supreme Court case over an immigration dispute, what it means for tens of thousands of U.S. residents.
Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep as the world watches from the outside.
It's a big diplomatic tug of war here in the Middle East.
Go inside the story with Jerusalem Dateline.
Israeli archaeologists are talking about a discovery that could change the thinking about the Temple Mount.
Join CBN Jerusalem Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell and get the biblical perspective on the events shaping the world.
It's what starts in Israel then ends up going to other places.
Watch Jerusalem Dateline Friday night at 8:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Life. It's meant to be lived fully. Jesus said it. I came to give you life. Life to the fullest. Life in your family. Life in your finances. Life in your body, mind, and spirit. Life in your everyday. At CBN.com, we're taking what Jesus said seriously. We're here to help you discover life. Life. Live it fully. CBN.com.
Can non-U.S. citizens living in the U.S. under temporary protected status receive green cards? That's the question up for debate in the U.S. Supreme Court, which heard oral arguments in the landmark immigration case today. The case hinges on whether those TPS recipients have been admitted to the U.S.
Our position is simply that S4 considers TPS recipients to be in lawful non-immigrant status for just one purpose, that purpose being adjustment of status. And importantly, the only characteristic of non-immigrant status that is even relevant to adjusting status is the fact that non-immigrants are inspected and admitted.
The case is Sanchez versus Mayorkas and could impact whether thousands of U.S. residents who entered the U.S. illegally can live and work permanently in the U.S. as non-U.S. citizens.
Well, joining us now is Muzaffar Chishti. He is the director of New York University's Migration Policy Institute. Muzaffar, welcome to Faith Nation. We just heard Jenna give the broad strokes general outline. Can you explain why this case is significant?
Thanks for having me, first of all. The case is significant because there are close to 400,000 people in the country who have temporary protected status, and some of them could be eligible to get a green card. And under our law, you can get a green card in the United States only if you fill certain requirements. And one of them is that you must have been admitted. You couldn't have crossed illegally and get a green card. These plaintiffs are arguing that Congress, in a separate provision, said that just because you're in TPS status, you're considered a non-immigrant. And that sort of waives the fact that they were not admitted and therefore they're eligible. The courts of appeals in this country are divided on the split, 3-3. 3 sets of courts have said that yes, they are eligible. 3 sets have said they're not. So Supreme Court will have to decide which side of that argument they will rule on, and this was a very interesting argument this morning.
Where does the Biden administration stand on this case, and does it put the White House in conflict with Democratic allies?
The Biden administration took the same position as all administrations have put in the past, including the Trump administration, that the statute does not allow for TPS holders to adjust their status in the United States. That's not that inconsistent with prior administrations, but it does put it certainly at a different path than many advocates in this country, especially for those advocating for the TPS holders.
You hinted at this, but if we can just drill down a little bit about the eligibility of non-immigrant status, can you speak to the importance of receiving green cards as it relates to whether a person is in the U.S. under temporary protected status and whether they've been admitted into the country or not?
So temporary protected status is in our law only since 1990. It's a provision Congress passed so that people who are in this country from nationality groups fleeing from countries which are facing volcanoes and those kind of crises like a hurricane, that it would be unsafe for them to return. We allow them to stay, but the idea is to allow them to stay on a temporary basis. But there are now 400,000 people in this country. Half of them have stayed here longer than a decade. So some of them can have other provisions of the law which allows them to get a green card. They could be married to a U.S. citizen. They could have an employer who sponsors them. The issue is that even though they're eligible to get the green card, can they get it inside the country? And that inside the country green card is called adjustment. And for adjustment, one of the provisions is that you must have made a legal entry. But many of the TPS holders have not made legal entry. So the issue is that does that disqualify them? The TPS statute considers them to be in the non-immigrant status. But government is saying just because they're considered non-immigrant status doesn't mean that you have waived the requirement of admission. And that's where the rub is. And if you get a green card, that's sort of like the gold standard. That puts you here permanently and then puts you on the path to citizenship.
We are out of time. Muzaffar Chishti, thank you so much for your insights. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
When we come back, the drive to make Washington, D.C. a state is gaining momentum. More on the expected full House vote later this week.
On October 1st, 1961, history was made when a tiny station began transmitting the first signals of the Christian Broadcasting Network.
CBN, the Christian Broadcasting Network.
And now, a new era has begun with the all-new CBN News Channel.
Just moments ago, the Iron Dome intercepted an incoming rocket right on the Gaza border.
Administering in this area, spiritual warfare is definitely involved.
A 24/7 news network, bringing you the news you want from a source you can trust.
In Kenya, 40% of the medical services are actually provided by these Christian hospitals.
Let's talk about the economy.
Believers here are joining together to win people to Jesus Christ.
All your favorite shows now in one place. Go to cbnnewschannel.com to find out how to get the CBN News Channel on your TV all day, every day. CBN News. Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
Life. It's meant to be lived fully. Jesus said it. I came to give you life. Life to the fullest. Life in your family. Life in your finances. Life in your body, mind, and spirit. Life in your everyday. At CBN.com, we're taking what Jesus said seriously. We're here to help you discover life. Life. Live it fully. CBN.com.
Well, a bill that would make Washington, D.C. the 51st state gets a full House vote this week. The push to make the nation's capital a full-fledged state has at least 212 co-sponsors and is expected to pass in the democratically controlled House during Thursday's vote. A similar measure passed the House last year, but the effort stalled in the Senate. This go-around, Democrats hold a slim majority and are expected to bring the bill to the Senate floor. Critics, though, argue it's unconstitutional and that making D.C. the 51st state, which would require a change to the Constitution, would ultimately tilt the balance of power in Washington by adding 2 more senators to the Senate, which would likely be Democratic.
And joining us now is Zach Smith, a legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Zach, good evening. Thank you for joining us. Does this surprise you at all that this bill made it out of committee and is now heading for a full House vote?
No, unfortunately, it doesn't surprise me. As you mentioned, an almost identical bill passed the House of Representatives last year along a party line vote. And I anticipate, again, unfortunately, that the same thing will likely happen again this year, and that H.R. 51, which proposes to make the District of Columbia our nation's 51st state, will likely pass the House of Representatives, again, along a party line vote.
So the next logical question, you anticipate that it will pass in the House. What will happen once it makes it to the Senate?
Well, it's a little bit different than it was last year, obviously, because the control of the Senate has changed in that interim time period. Right now, there are 44 co-sponsors to S51, which is the Senate companion bill to H.R. 51. And so I think you're going to hear a lot of talk within the next several weeks about whether or not the Democratic members have the votes to pass this bill, and if they can get to 50 votes, whether they will be willing or able to abolish or alter the filibuster in order to pass this legislation, which, again, I think would be a very dangerous, a very grave mistake for them to do.
Zach, so you testified in a House hearing last month, and you talked about the framers and what they envisioned for the federal capital. Is there a constitutional reason that the nation's capital is not a state?
Yeah, absolutely. The framers envisioned that the seat of the federal government would be independent from any state. And there were really 2 reasons behind that. They wanted to ensure that the federal government could have physical control over the Capitol sufficiently to secure the officials who work there, the buildings that are there that house government operations. And they also wanted to make sure that no one state had an outsized influence on the operations of the federal government. A lot of times you hear things, that are cast as almost silly arguments about parking, about electricity, utilities, but that's very much goes to the heart of what the framers wanted to ensure, that no state could harass or basically exert influence over the federal government with even these day-to-day tasks that are so essential to a functioning government. And so if we focus on the Constitution, really one of the biggest impediments to the district becoming a state by simple legislation is the existence of the 23rd Amendment which gives electors to the district for president and vice president. And unfortunately, H.R. 51 wouldn't repeal the 23rd Amendment. It would encourage states to do so, but not require it. And so you'd be left in a very odd situation where potentially the first family would control 3 electoral college votes. That's certainly something that the framers of the 23rd Amendment did not anticipate.
Zach, final question here in just the last few seconds we have left. Would love to get you to weigh in on the argument of people who oppose the bill on how this would tilt the balance of power in the Senate.
Well, look, I think it's certainly being brought right now because it is politically advantageous to the Democratic members of the House and the Senate in an attempt to add 2 new Democratic senators. But at the end of the day, politics aside, that doesn't change the constitutional issues. And historically, this has been a bipartisan consensus that a constitutional amendment is needed to change the status of D.C.
Zach, we are out of time. Zach Smith with the Heritage Foundation, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on. Take care.
Still ahead, ingenuity at its finest and a Wright brothers moment in the NASA control room.
Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
I'm Ephraim Graham, and this is Studio 5. Cruise with me as I discover the good things happening in the world of music, sports, television, and movies.
The fact that Ryan Coogler was going to be directing the film, I knew that something special was going to happen.
We'll chat with artists at the forefront of entertainment and explore the connection between popular culture and faith.
I asked my pastor, I said, well, does that mean I'm supposed to be a preacher? He says, well, no, you already have a pulpit.
Wednesday night at 8:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Remember for a moment what it was like to be a child. You believed every story you were told. You saw a world full of endless possibilities. What stories will the world's orphaned and at-risk children believe? We believe the Bible tells the only story truly worth believing. We believe that every child should have the opportunity to dream, the chance to take challenges and turn them into possibilities, the chance to stand on the promises of God, to recognize their place in the greatest story ever told. They have their whole lives ahead of them. Theirs is a world of endless possibilities. They are looking for a story to believe. We will tell them that story. Will you join us?
Well, finally tonight, it's one for the record books for NASA, first of its kind experiment that went off without a hitch.
A 4-pound helicopter named Ingenuity rose from the dusty surface of Mars in the first controlled flight on another planet.
Confirmed that Ingenuity has performed its first flight, the first flight of a powered aircraft on another planet.
And the project manager and her team anxiously waited more than 3 hours before learning whether the flight was successful. Ingenuity hitched a ride to Mars in February in what was considered a high-risk mission. And it looks like, John, that mission is paying off.
I would say so. Pretty big accomplishment. Congratulations to the folks at NASA.
Yeah, no kidding. Neat to watch their work. All right, that does it for Faith Nation this evening.
Hope you have a great night. See you tomorrow.